Hello to my lovely students and whoever else is tuning in. So this video I'm directing to my students, but anyone is welcome to listen. I hope you guys are enjoying your time off. On Monday, you will be able to pick up your learning packets, your grade cards, and I put in your STAR math and reading reports for your parents to check out. So up until then, I'm going to start reading a read aloud that I wanted to start reading with you guys when we got back from break. But as you know, we are not going to be returning to school for a couple weeks, so I figured I could go ahead and start reading now. The book that I have picked, I actually picked a different book just because I feel like this kind of goes along with what we are currently experiencing. It's called Among the Hidden by Margaret Peterson Haddix. If you've read this book before or if you're familiar with the author, she's one of my favorite authors, and I read this series when I was in elementary school and middle school, and I just loved it. It's a good kind of mystery. It keeps you wondering what's going to happen next. So what I'll do is I'll read one or two chapters at a time, and between chapters or whenever I feel like it's a good stopping point, I'll stop and pose a question where you guys can pause the video and kind of talk to someone else that's listening, or just kind of think to yourself like what we would do in the classroom. If you have someone beside you, then you can meet up with a shoulder partner or a group of three, or just whoever is listening with you. I think this is an age-appropriate book for, it says ages 8 to 12 on the back, so 8 is like, I think second grade, second, third, fourth grade, fifth grade, whoever. It's a good, interesting book that'll keep you kind of on your toes. I'll read the back to you, and then I'll start reading chapter 1. Luke has never been to school. He's never had a birthday party or gone to a friend's house for an overnight. In fact, Luke has never had a friend. Luke is one of the shadow children, a third child forbidden by the population police. He's lived his entire life in hiding, and now with the new housing development replacing the woods next to his family's farm, he is no longer even allowed to go outside. Then, one day, Luke sees a girl's face in the window of a house where he knows two other children already live. Finally, he's met a shadow child like himself. Jen is willing to risk everything to come out of the shadows. Does Luke dare to become involved in her dangerous plan? Can he afford not to? So it's kind of fitting with what's happening in our life right now. So this is chapter 1. He saw the first tree shudder and fall, far off in the distance. Then he heard his mother call out the kitchen window, "Luke, inside now." He had never disobeyed the order to hide. Even as a toddler, barely able to walk in the backyard's tall grass, he had somehow understood the fear in his mother's voice. But on this day, the day they began taking the woods away, he hesitated. He took one extra breath of the fresh air, scented with clover and honeysuckle, and, coming from far away, pine smoke. He laid his hoe down gently and savored one last moment of feeling warm soil beneath his bare feet. He reminded himself, I will never be allowed outside again. Maybe never again, as long as I live. He turned and walked into the house, as silently as a shadow. Why, he asked at the supper table that night. It wasn't a common question in their Garner house. There was plenty of house. How much rain How much rain did the backfield get? How's the planting going? Even what'd Matthew do with the 5/6 wrench? What's Dad going to do about that busted tire? But why was never considered much worth asking. Luke asked again, "Why do you have to sell the woods?" Luke's dad harumphed and paused in the midst of shoveling forkloads of boiled potatoes in his mouth. "Told you before, we didn't have a choice. Government wanted it. You can't tell the government no." Mother came over and gave Luke's shoulder a reassuring squeeze before turning back to the stove. They had defied the government once, with Luke. That had taken all the defiance they had in them, maybe more. "We wouldn't have sold the woods if we hadn't had to," she said, ladling out the thick tomatoey soup. "The government didn't ask us if we wanted houses there." She pursed her lips and slid the bowls of soup onto the table. "But the government's not going to live in the houses," Luke protested. At 12, he knew better, but sometimes still pictured the government as a very big, mean, fat person 2 or 3 times as tall as the ordinary man, who went around yelling at people, "Not allowed!" and "Stop that!" It was because of the way his parents and older brothers talked. "Government won't let us plant corn there again. Government's keeping the prices down. Government's not going to like this crop." "Probably some of the people who live in those houses will be government workers," Mother said. "It'll all be city people." If he'd been allowed, Luke would have gone over to the kitchen window and peered out at the woods, trying for the umpteenth time to picture rows and rows of houses where the firs and maples and oaks now stood, or had stood. Luke knew from a sneak peek right before supper that half the trees were now toppled. Some already lay on the ground. Some hung at weird angles from their former lofty positions in the sky. Their absence made everything look different, like a fresh haircut exposing a band of untanned skin on a forehead. Even from deep inside the kitchen, Luke could tell the trees were missing because everything was brighter, more open, scarier. "And then, when these people move in, I have to stay away from the windows?" Luke asked, though he knew the answer. The question made Dad explode. He slammed his hand down on the table. "Then, you gotta stay away now. Everybody and his brother is going to be tramping around back there to see what's going on. They see you." He waved his fork violently. Luke wasn't sure what the gesture meant, but he knew it wasn't good. No one had ever told him exactly what would happen if anyone saw him. Death? Death was what happened to the rump pigs who got stepped on by their stronger brothers and sisters. Death was a fly that stopped buzzing when the swatter hit. He had a hard time thinking about himself in connection with the smashed fly or the dead pig, gone stiff in the sun. It made his stomach feel funny, even trying. "I don't think it's fair we've got to do Luke's chores now," Luke's older brother Mark grumbled. "Can't he go outside some, maybe at night?" Luke waited hopefully for the answer, but Dad just said no, without looking up. "It's not fair," Mark said again. Mark was the second son, the lucky second, Luke thought when he was feeling sorry for himself. Mark was 2 years older than Luke and barely a year younger than Matthew, the oldest. Matthew and Mark were easily recognizable as brothers, with their dark hair and chiseled faces. Luke was fairer, smaller boned, softer looking. He often wondered if he'd ever look tougher than them. Somehow, he didn't think so. Luke don't do nothing nohow," Matthew jeered. We won't miss his work at all." "It's not my fault," Luke protested. "I'd help more if—" Mother laid her hands on his shoulders again. "Hush, all of you," she said. "Luke will do what he can. He always has." The sound of tires on their gravel driveway came through the open window. Now who? Dad started. Luke knew the rest of the sentence. Who could that be? Why were they bothering him now? His first chance all day to sit down. It was a question Luke always heard at the end. Luke always heard the end of from the other side of a door. Today, skittish because of the woods coming down, he scrambled up faster than usual, dashing for the door to the back stairs. He knew without watching that his mother would take his plate from the table and hide it in a cupboard, would slide his chair back to the corner so it looked like an unneeded spare. In 3 seconds, she would hide all evidence that Luke existed just in time to step to the door and offer a weary smile to the fertilizer salesman or the government inspector or whomever else had come to interrupt their supper. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. I want you guys to talk to whomever, yourself, or if there's someone else listening. Just kind of talk about what's happened so far in the first chapter and make a prediction of what you think is going to happen next. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll post the second video shortly after this first one.